Welcome and thank you for joining us. This evening we'll be speaking with Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance, Dr. Ashni Singh. I'm Felicia Valenzuela. In the next half hour or so, we'll be talking to Minister Singh about his exciting announcement made just this afternoon. And so, Minister, I just want to say welcome to our program and just basically, how are you today?
Thank you very much, Felicia. Let me say, first of all, of course, that it's a great pleasure to be here again, and I must thank you very much for inviting me to be on the program. It's always a pleasure to be in your studios and to be doing these programs with you. So thanks a lot for inviting me.
All right. Yes, sir. You're welcome. I actually feel a bit honored because you made this huge announcement this afternoon, and I'm the first person to speak with you, so I am honored right now.
Thank you very much. I am honored to be on the program.
Well, thank you for coming. All right. So, in this announcement that you made three major points. And before we actually get to it, I know that in the last year or so, government has been putting out a lot of work in terms of cushioning the our citizens, basically, because we've been dealing with the pandemic and a number of other issues like the flooding and so on. So firstly, how has it been in terms of coming up with these figures? And we're not going to these points directly, but how it has been in terms of perhaps leveling a field where citizens can benefit from the initiatives that government has been putting out.
Sure. So let me maybe take a step back and go perhaps to the point where President Ali assumed office in August 2020. I think that's a useful starting point. I think it's widely known that as soon as the president assumed office and took up his appointment and his election as president of Guyana on the 2nd of August 2020, he set about, of course, taking stock of the economic situation of the country, meeting with various stakeholders, assessing what was happening in the various sectors, etc. And of course, appointing his cabinet and getting his cabinet up and running and so on. And one of the things that became immediately evident to the president and to the new government was that the country really was feeling the very strong effects of what had been an extremely difficult 5-year period from 2015 to 2020, what had been an extremely difficult period from December 2018, when the no confidence motion had been approved by Parliament, to March 2020 in the first instance, when the elections were finally held. And then, of course, and perhaps even more so, from March 2020 to August 2020, during the protracted period associated with the APNU AFC finally accepting and respecting the will of the people. And I mention these periods because successively each one of these periods added an additional layer, an additional level of pressure on the economy. So to begin with, when the APNU AFC assumed office in 2015, they immediately went about implementing a number of measures that automatically imposed a lot of hardship on people and automatically put pressure on the economy. So I could mention some of these. They imposed a lot of new taxes, over 200 new taxes, as is widely known, including things like VAT on electricity, on water, on medical and educational supplies, on education services, on construction materials, on heavy equipment for industry. They increased land rents, they increased fees for literally everything, shop fees. I think there's an urban joke, although it's not a joke. I mean, some people joke that even horse card fees were raised. So literally every single fee, every single government charge was raised, and taxes were imposed, and a lot of the benefits that have been, a lot of the social safety nets that we had provided were withdrawn. Things like the support to parents, the cash grant, the cash grants given to parents of the school uniform program, the subsidies provided to the elderly for utilities, All of those things were withdrawn. I mean, some things were moved from zero rated to exempt, which meant that they were now more expensive under the VAT regime. And so to begin with, from the time the AP, and they of course adopted a very hostile posture towards the private sector and towards investors, which meant that automatically investors started to hold back. Jobs were no longer being created, incomes were no longer being generated. So from day one, from the very first, pretty much from the very first budget that the APNU AFC took to Parliament, they started to introduce these measures, one budget after another, essentially adding on pressure on the people of Guyana and essentially completely destroying the environment for doing business, the investor climate, which of course translated into hardship for people. Then in December, so that was already happening from 2015. And then of course in December 2018, when the no confidence motion was passed, and as you know, our constitution is written in plain English language, and our constitution requires that upon the approval of a no confidence motion, the parliament is expected to be dissolved and an election is expected to be held in 90 days. Anybody can pick up the constitution and read its English language. And so the entire world expected that an election would have been called, that the constitutional provisions would have been respected and an election would have been called in 3 months. And when the world saw that that was not happening, the clear and unequivocal signal was that dictatorship was taking hold in Guyana. And that completely destroyed the business environment. Investors completely closed up shop, decided they were not going to invest in Guyana. No jobs were being created any longer. Even the little trickle that was happening as a result of the startup of oil and gas, even that dried up. Everybody pretty much put their projects on hold or canceled their projects, started to lay off people, and the economy essentially went into a standstill. And then the elections eventually were called for March 2020, and perhaps everybody expected that, as in the normal course of things, you have an election, a result, there's a count that takes perhaps a few hours or a couple of days, and then a result is announced and a new government is appointed. In Guyana's case in 2020, it took from March to August, and it took all manner of advocacy, of domestic stakeholder pressure, of international pressure, etc., for the then government to respect the will of the people. And that added on an additional layer of pressure, because of course no investor wants to be anywhere near to a dictatorship. Essentially things, if you could have ground to an even greater standstill, the country literally ground to an even greater standstill. So if it was standing, if from December 2018 to March 2020 it was standing still but still breathing, the economy perhaps was standing still but still struggling to breathe, from March 2020 to August 2020 it stopped breathing completely. And then on top of that you had COVID-19, which added of course an even different, yet another dimension of pressure, including things like social distancing. A number of sectors closed up completely because of the nature of their operations. People couldn't interact as per normal and so on. And so when President Ali came into government and assumed his office, he discovered that things were in an absolutely devastating state. There were people who were out of work. There were families who were without an income. There were businesses that were closed and literally on their deathbeds. And the president set about implementing a number of measures to provide immediate relief, to ease and alleviate the pressure that had been on the Guyanese people for so long and on the Guyanese economy for so long, and to start to restore some semblance of normalcy, notwithstanding that COVID-19 was still with us. And so you saw Budget 2020, the emergency budget for 2020, which implemented a number of measures immediately, removal of a lot of the taxes, the hardship taxes that had been put on electricity, water, restoration of a number of the social safety nets and the support measures to people, including restoring the uniform uniform grant to the cash grant to parents and so on. So we did that immediately with Budget 2020, And of course, we also provided direct cash transfers. We provided the COVID-19 cash grant to households. That was almost $8 billion, $25,000 per household. We provided a one-off payout to all public sector employees. More than 60,000 persons benefited from that. Here again, that was a one-off payout of $25,000 to each public sector employee. We provided, of course, a special payout to frontline workers and members of the discipline services. We reinstated, of course, the year-end bonus to members of the discipline services. And then we brought Budget 2021, which was then at the time the first full-year budget for the new PPPC government. And in that, we further advanced the relief measures that we were rolling out, including things like raising the old age pensions from $20,500 to $25,000, raising public assistance from $9,000 to $12,000 monthly. And then more recently, in August 2021, we also announced a number of other support measures, a one-off payout to old age pensioners, beneficiaries of public assistance, persons living with disabilities, a special program to provide an electricity credit to households that are small consumers of electricity. And so this effort to provide immediate relief to people started, like I said, as soon as the president assumed office, and it has been further rolled out in Budget 2021. So you had all of those initiatives implemented in 2020, and in particular in December 2020. And then, of course, you have these additional measures implemented in Budget 2021. And so the announcement that was made today really has to be seen against this background, the background of a context where we came into government and found an economy that was literally on its deathbed. And we saw Guyanese households, Guyanese families, Guyanese individuals really facing a lot of tremendous economic hardship and difficulties. And we've set about in earnest trying to ease that pressure, trying to, once again breathe some oxygen back, or have some oxygen injected again into the economy. And we're seeing a lot of, very good results, notwithstanding that COVID-19 is already amongst us. As you know, the economy has resumed growing after a very difficult time. And so that, this announcement today's announcements, I would situate within the context of that background.
As you mentioned the announcement, I wanted to talk to you about the second one that you made, which is the $400 million for special payout. And I wanted to talk, I know you said that details will follow in another announcement, but can you tell us a little bit about arriving at that figure?
Sure. So let me say that we recognize that our frontline workers in the health sector have really been facing very, very challenging circumstances. And as a government, I was going to say I take my hat off to them, but I mean, the fact of the matter is that the entire government, we all take our hats off to our our colleagues in the health sector who have been at the front line facing, a challenge that is unknown in its quantity. When COVID-19 came out, nobody really knew what it was about, and what it implied and what its consequences are. And up to now in the world, I think we're still trying to understand, what COVID-19 is going to mean, even medically, for the longer term. And so the fact that we have doctors and nurses at the front line, helping to protect people, helping to treat people, helping to save lives, helping to keep people in good health, is something really to be saluted. And I know as a government at the highest level, at the level of the president, there is no shortage of appreciation whatsoever, quite the opposite. There is an immeasurable level of appreciation at the level of the government for the sacrifices that have been made, the risks that have been taken on very boldly and bravely by our frontline workers, and the tremendous effort that they've been making to keep the people of Guyana safe and in good health. And so this one-off payment to frontline workers reflects our recognition. We could never possibly compensate people for the risks that they take and the hard work that they do and so on. But this is really to, you know, to place on record our strong appreciation of the efforts, the extra efforts that they've been making. In terms of, you know, determining the quantum, like I said, you know, one could perhaps never really fully quantify, you know, the nature of the risks and the value of the efforts, the nature of the risks being faced, and the value of the efforts being made. You know, one could scarcely really quantify that. But this represents, of course, you know, we want something tangible to be given to our health sector workers, you know, within the context, of course, of you know, affordability, you know, in from a fiscal sense.
All right, Minister, as we're on the topic of the pandemic, I know, like you've rightly said, that government has made a lot of effort in terms of cushioning citizens, basically, but I wanted to talk about the medical aspect of it in terms of placing enough resources to deal with the pandemic itself. And I know from the emergency budget into the full-scale budget for 2021 that government has placed a lot of resources into not only training, and training is just like one aspect, but in terms of ensuring that the country had adequate resources to respond to the pandemic. So if we can briefly address that before you go on.
Oh, absolutely. I'm really glad that you asked that. It's a very important question because COVID-19 was a pandemic. Perhaps it's probably not right for me to say it's a pandemic of pandemics, but it was something that the world had never seen before. And you know, it was vast in its reach, it spread rapidly, it was easily spreadable. And you know, we were really disturbed when we came into office to see how ill-prepared and unprepared the health sector in particular was for this pandemic, notwithstanding that the APNU AFC had been in government, you know, had held on to government illegally, admittedly, for several months after COVID-19 got to Guyana. So COVID-19, I think our first case was recorded in March of 2020. Yeah. And from March to August, it would appear that the APNU AFC was far more preoccupied with holding on to government illegally rather than confronting the real challenges that people were facing. And so when we came into government, we discovered a health sector that was woefully unprepared to deal with the pandemic. And you know, I will mention a few things. You know, some attempts had been made to start outfitting this Liliendal hospital, but the project was dragging on, and the hospital was nowhere remotely close to being at a point where it could actually receive patients. So we came and we met a very, to put it politely, a very incomplete piece of work at the Liliendal Hospital, notwithstanding the months that they spent, you know, doing whatever they were doing there. We found a health sector that was not adequately equipped from the point of view of having things like ventilators and hospital beds to accommodate COVID-19 patients. We found that frontline workers were not adequately equipped with very basic things like PPEs, you know, the protective gear that they're required to have. And we found, astonishingly, that the testing was woefully inadequate. So, I mean, the numbers of tests that were being provided, I mean, the number of tests that were being conducted were just so small, when the whole world had recognized that everybody ran the risk of being of contracting COVID-19 because of the nature of the virus. And yet we found that the number of test kits and the capacity to test was shockingly inadequate. I mean, there are other stories. I don't want to get into those. I heard there were all sorts of speculation about test results having to go to the minister before they were released and all sorts of things like that. But even putting all of that aside, the level of testing was woefully inadequate, as a result of which you probably had people walking around with COVID-19 and spreading COVID-19 without knowing that they had it and without knowing that they were spreading it. And so detection was woefully poor. The capacity to treat those who were detected was woefully inadequate. The protections afforded to those who were doing the treatment were the protections that were afforded to those who were actually doing the treatment were terribly atrocious. And so we had to address all of those. First of all, we had to develop the capability to receive and treat patients. We had to complete the Lilienthal Hospital. We had to put in place enough beds. We had to put in place equipment such as ventilators and so on and oxygen and so on because a single COVID-19 patient consumes vast amounts of oxygen when they're put on the ventilators. And so we had to put in place all of those, put in place the capacity to receive and treat persons who unfortunately and sadly were unable to avoid contracting the virus. We had to ramp up testing so that we would be testing on a mass scale so that anybody who wanted the test could get the test, and so that we could really, test in bulk and be able to turn around results very swiftly. We had to do that. We had to make sure that our medical workers were adequately equipped, that they had the PPEs, that they were themselves kept safe. And then, of course, as soon as vaccines started to become available, we had to buy vaccines, which we did also to ensure that people, were provided the surest way of being protected from COVID-19. And then we had to deal with this bizarre situation where some members of the opposition were even ridiculously discouraging people from taking the vaccine when they themselves had taken the vaccine. And that took a lot of public education and communication and so on. So the efforts to fight COVID-19 have been tremendous. We've been taking on those efforts. We're still taking them on, and we will continue to work very hard to raise the vaccination levels up to where they need to be so that hopefully everybody will get protected. We will get to the point that we describe as herd immunity. But that we still also have the capability to treat those people who, unfortunately, notwithstanding that they would have been vaccinated, might unfortunately contract the virus.
All right, well, if you're now joining us, I'm speaking with Dr. Ashni Singh, and of course, he made one of the biggest announcements in the country just this evening, announcing the 7% increase for public servants and so on. But before we actually get to that part of your announcement, I have another part that I wanted to talk to you about. So, as per your announcement, and I'll read what you said. You said, firstly, your government has recognized the existence of a number of anomalies and disparities across the position within the public service salary scale. And you were speaking specifically of persons holding perhaps similar positions but in different agencies, but their salaries were not the same. And you did announce that government intends to deal with that come next year. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, absolutely. So what we have come to observe is that there are a number of anomalies across the public service. So you might have a person in a position that requires a set of skills and certain levels of qualifications in one agency, and you might have a person in another agency that in a job that requires a similar set of skills and a similar set of qualifications, doing a job of substantially similar nature. But because of how the jobs are classified, which grade they're on or which salary scale they're on, the two persons are being paid differently. They're on different scales and they're in receipt of different salaries, notwithstanding that the skill set required is the same, notwithstanding that the qualifications and experience required are the same. So to give you an example, maybe a hypothetical example, you might have, I don't know, let's say perhaps an environmental officer in one agency, an entry-level environmental officer in one agency, a position that requires, let us say, hypothetically, no previous experience and a bachelor's degree in environmental science. In one ministry, you may have an environmental officer, brand new graduate coming out of the University of Ghana with their environmental science degree, and they're in that position. In another agency, you might also have an environmental officer position recruiting a brand new graduate also from the University of Ghana, probably from the same class even, with exactly the same degree, doing substantially, even if not an identical job, holding the same qualifications and holding the same skill set, but in a job that is on a different grade and that pays a different salary. And we've seen quite a few anomalies like that, inconsistencies like that. And we recognize that this is something that, these disparities cause, create a lot of distortion. They create perverse incentives, people wanting to move from one agency to another, when in fact they're doing substantially a job at the same level and they're bringing substantially the same skills, but they want to move from one place to another because, their classmate with exactly the same degree is over there getting $20, $30, $40, $50,000 more than them. And so we want to regularize this, that persons in similar posts of similar nature across agencies and holding identical qualifications should not, face this disparity or this inconsistency. And so it's going to take a little bit of work. It's not going to be a simple exercise. It's going to take, that's why we're not doing it. We have to really look at it. We have already observed a number of such anomalies, but we want to take a closer look at it across the board to identify, as many of these cases as we can to fix them. And so we've committed. The first announcement that I made today on the Cabinet's behalf is that we've committed to address this matter in 2022. And so we're going to be looking across the board, across the entire public service to identify where these inconsistencies apply. In particular, like I said, where people with identical qualifications are being paid differently. We're going to look across the board, identify all of these cases with a view to resolving this anomalous situation. That's going to happen in 2022.
All right. I must use this opportunity to also talk about how much, and you're the minister with responsibility for finance, so largely you basically touch on each sector of the government. So I wanted to talk to you about the measures that government has put in place you talk about fixing this particular issue, but I noted that government has gone further to ensure that persons are even qualified. And we have goal, for example. So I wanted to talk to you about those measures also. How much planning went into that?
No, you're absolutely correct, and I'm glad that you raised that because we have a clear position, almost a philosophical position. We want every single Guyanese person of working age to be equipped with skills that are relevant to the labor market of today and of tomorrow, and to be able to participate meaningfully in the economy of today and tomorrow. And so we want every person of working age to be trained or retrained and to be equipped with relevant skills to be able to participate meaningfully and in a fulfilling and satisfying manner in the economy. And I speak of the economy of today and tomorrow because, of course, the economy is going through very significant structural changes. New industries are starting up because of what's happening in the Guyanese economy today. Entire new sectors are starting operation. New skills are being needed. Skills are being needed on a completely different scale. New and more specialist certifications are being required to do certain kinds of jobs. And we want to make sure that people have these skills. And so we're investing very heavily in training at all levels. Of course, we're investing heavily to make sure that people have their basic education, basic primary and secondary education. We want to achieve universal secondary education. Everybody must have a place in a secondary school and be able to complete secondary school. But we're also investing very heavily in technical and vocational education because we want to make sure that the technical skills that are needed, which are going to be of even greater importance, in the economy going forward, we want to make sure that people have those skills. And at the tertiary level, as you know, we've rolled out now the Gold Scholarship Program. You just mentioned Gold Scholarship Program because oftentimes people are unable to access university education for a variety of reasons. First of all, you have geography. When we first came into government in 1992, the University of Guyana had one campus, the Turkine campus. We built the Tain campus, a second campus, which has allowed thousands of Guyanese persons now in Berbice Region 6 and even Region 5 to be able to attend university and get a diploma, get a degree, get higher education. But that notwithstanding, there's still people who live in far-flung areas and for whom it is not necessarily easy to leave where they live, to come to Georgetown or to go to Tain, to come to Turkine or go to Tain to get a university education. You know, sometimes we take for granted those of us who live in Georgetown or the East Coast or the East Bank, or those of us who live in Region 5 or 6, and we can commute very easily to Turkine and Tain. We take these things for granted. But if you're living in Essequibo, or you're living in Region 1, or you're living in Region 7 or 8 or 9, Bartica or Lethem, or frankly speaking, I mean, even Linden, because I mean, although you can take a bus and come from Linden to Turkine, the commute from Linden to Turkine is not a short commute. Yes. And so the reality is that if you live a little bit far away from Turkine and Tain, access to university education is a pretty complicated thing. You have to get a place to live. That involves costs. So and then of course, if you live in particularly in the hinterland and so on, it becomes even more complicated because the cost of going back home and coming back out and so on, is much more expensive. You have to fly out and fly back in and so on. And then of course you have other reasons. You have people who perhaps simply can't go to university, in the normal course of things because they're holding down a full-time job and they're the sole breadwinner for their family, or they are a single parent and they have a young child that they have to take care of, and they can't leave their young child at home to go to university because they don't have somebody who can help to take care of their child while they're at classes and so on. So there are all sorts of these circumstances that sometimes, like I said, those who are able to just get up, pack their bags and go to campus, take that privilege for granted. But there are a lot of people who are not in a situation to be able to enjoy that privilege. And so we want to make sure that access to university education is not constrained by these personal circumstances. And so we've introduced the GOAL program, which is delivering university education online in your home, wherever you are. And as you know, we have advertised the program nationally. We've gotten thousands of applications. I think we've probably awarded 5,000 or 6,000 scholarships already. Just recently, I think there was an orientation ceremony for some of the people starting with one of the universities, I think just a few days ago. With Jain University, Ministers Parag and Manik Chand hosted and led Guyana's participation in that orientation ceremony. And so GOAL is an example of one of the initiatives that we've implemented to ensure that all Guyanese persons who would like to have access to university education, notwithstanding their personal circumstances, they're able to apply and able to get higher education. And that's, like I said, one part, and albeit an important part. It's just one part of our broader approach to ensuring that people, we're also doing a lot of work on training on the technical side, through the technical institutes, through the Board of Industrial Training, delivering technical education to people.
All right, thank you so much, Minister. Before we get to your one of the main announcements that you made this afternoon, I wanted to ask, in terms of getting ready for this, because obviously this wasn't a number that you just decide on, at whim. It would have taken a lot of planning and so on. So getting into that, could you just tell me a little bit about the preparation?
Sure, absolutely. So as you know, the task of budget preparation and execution of the budget and preparing the next year's budget is almost an ongoing process. Oftentimes, I meet people and they say to me, you're probably busy preparing the budget, and I don't want to disappoint them and tell them that I feel like I'm almost living from one budget cycle straight into the other budget cycle. It never ends. And so, you do a lot of technical work goes into the preparation of the budget long before the budget is actually delivered in the Parliament and long before the public sees the budget. So it's, several months before preparatory work starts to develop the budget submissions, develop the macroeconomic framework, get a sense of the fiscal space that's available, get a sense of affordability, get a sense of how the expenditure aggregates will affect, the fiscal aggregates will affect the rest of the economy. A lot of technical work goes into that process from very early on. And then, of course, we prepare the detailed budget estimates, we prepare the detailed budget measures, we deliver the budget speech, and we start executing the budget immediately. And so you're absolutely correct that in all of these initiatives, not just the ones that we announced today, but in all of them, quite a lot of serious technical work would have gone into determining, like I said, first of all, the broad macroeconomic framework, questions of affordability, fiscal space, determining allocations across sectors, because of course, President Ali is understandably and rightly in a hurry to modernize literally every single sector of Guyana, and every single aspect of life in Guyana, including infrastructure. You have seen the aggressive transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure programs that we're rolling out, access to social services, improving not just access but quality. And so, ensuring that we allocate resources across all of these competing needs and competing priorities, all of which are, of course, very important. So you are absolutely correct that quite a lot of technical work would have gone into this at an aggregate level, and then at a sectoral level, at an individual sectoral level as well, leading up to the final determinations of this nature. You're absolutely correct in that regard.
All right. It's a question that I perhaps can ask you. If the president was here, I would have asked him to. What was his thought process in terms of, this is something that he had mentioned before, mind you, and so he's been mentioning, on over and over, just letting people know something is coming. But what do you think that he would have felt personally?
Well, let me say this. The president and the vice president, and indeed many others in the cabinet, have been at pains to say repeatedly that we will be paying a salary increase to the public service. We have said this repeatedly. President, you're absolutely correct. Your viewers know this, I'm sure. The president has said this publicly on multiple occasions. He's been asked it, and he has answered the question on multiple occasions, and he has said it sometimes even when he was not asked. And so President Ali has repeated on multiple occasions his commitment to ensuring that public servants are paid a salary increase in 2021, for which we provided in the national budget. Vice President Jagdeo has said it publicly on a number of occasions. I have said it myself when asked. Minister Sonia Parag has said it on multiple occasions, including in Parliament. And so this is something that we had committed to. We've said very clearly and unequivocally, despite the fact that we've said it, those who want to create uncertainty or, would keep repeating that no salary increase for public servants and all sorts of things. But we were unequivocal about this. We were very, very clear from the very beginning. And so I know without a doubt that the making of this announcement is really just the culmination of a process that the president had committed to a very long time ago.
Yes.
Right? So this is just the delivery of an announcement that President Ali has himself committed to, and is on record as having committed himself to a very long time ago.
All right, so I have just a few more questions for you before we wrap up. So there obviously would be those persons out there that would say 7%, what are we going to do with that? Let's talk about numbers. What does that 7% mean to the man in the street, basically? And we're talking public servants.
Sure. Well, let me say first of all that 7% is a very substantial adjustment to the public service salary scales. And I mean, I think that is quite clear to anybody who is objective-minded and fair-minded. So to begin with, at an individual level, 7% represents a very significant adjustment to salaries. But in addition to that, if you look at what this means at the aggregate level, consider, for example, that this 7% salary increase is being paid to all public servants. It's being paid to teachers. It's being paid to members of the disciplined services. It's being paid to constitutional office holders. It's being paid to government pensioners, that is to say, former public servants and former teachers who are now in receipt of a government, who retired on the fixed establishment and are now in receipt of a government pension. So it's being paid to all of these persons. So you're literally speaking about tens of thousands of persons who are going to be receiving this salary increase, salary or pension increase as the case might be. Then, so that 7% is payable to all of those persons. And then, of course, you have the parastatal entities, the semi-autonomous state entities. And I will say that in relation to those, we have received a number of proposals from, several of them. Typically, they are treated separately from the public service. We have received a number of proposals from those semi-autonomous or parastatal entities, and we're examining those, and we'll determine how we will proceed with them. But if you take account of all the fact that a 7% is being paid to all of the entities that I've already identified, and in every likelihood, quite a few of the parastatals will also, usually we pay the parastatals depending on their capacity to pay, because many of them generate their own revenues and so on. So the usual practice is that there is a question of capacity to pay amongst those entities. But we will examine this question and examine all of the relevant factors in determining how to go forward. So when you consider that in the aggregate, you're probably looking at about 50 to 60,000 public sector employees who are going to be receiving an increase. That adds up literally to billions of dollars. And we have said publicly, and the instructions that have been issued by the president and then transmitted through his ministers, myself included, are that work must commence immediately for everybody to receive the salary increase with their December pay before Christmas. So what that translates to is every household that has a public sector employee will be getting their salary increase, and consider that it is retroactive to the 1st of January. So you're getting back pay. You'll be getting 11 months of back pay plus your December salary adjusted. Essentially, you can call it 12 months of back pay. Yeah. So it has retroactivity to the 1st of January, 2021. And you'll be getting that in December. That represents an injection of billions of dollars of disposable income. And I will go further. When this money is paid to the teachers, to the members of the discipline services, to the public servants, it doesn't vanish into thin air, or they don't lock it off somewhere in a box and it disappears, or put it under a mattress or somewhere and it disappears. They then take this salary increase, this money, this additional income that they would have received. What do they do with it logically? They go to the markets, they go to the shops, they go to the service providers, and they spend it.
So it goes back into the economy.
It goes back into the economy. Those market vendors, shopkeepers, service providers, they then, in turn, spend that additional revenue that they would have earned. They then go and they themselves buy from another market vendor or another shopkeeper or a wholesaler or a supplier. And it multiplies itself over time and time and time over. And so that is itself significant, because this represents not just an injection of income to an individual, it represents an injection of disposable income into a household, multiplied by 50 to 60,000 households. So you have, well, I shouldn't say so, because sometimes you have you might have two public servants or teachers and policemen and so on in the same household. Yeah. But you have 50 to 60,000 public sector employees whose households will be benefiting. Yeah. And in the aggregate, you have an economy that will be benefiting from this injection of liquidity.
Good. All right, Vince, I'm not completely finished yet. I have two more. Before I came in for the interview, someone called to ask, how is it going to go to my salary, the 7%? Is it how is it? Is it going to be taxed? Is it going to be my basic? Could you just walk me through that?
Sure. So this is a very standard thing that we do. I mean, we used to do it prior. When we were previously in government, and paying a salary increase is a pretty, straight. It's significant, but it's a pretty straightforward activity. Yeah. So what we typically, you adjust the basic salary. So the basic salary is now adjusted upwards. You calculate the retroactive amount, which is then paid. Whether or not it will be taxed depends on where the recipient is on the tax threshold. If you are on the tax spectrum, so if you're already a taxpayer, then it will be taxed like pretty much all other income is. And so, but it's a very straightforward thing that is going to be computed very simply. It's so the question, I would say in terms of computation, it's your basic salary increases by the 7% that has been announced. That's what is adjusted, basic salary. It's adjusted relative to the 1st of January 2021. So you would have already gotten January to November salary without that 7%. So we're going to go back and give you January to November, the 7% going back in addition to your December pay. So you get what we call the back pay, or the retroactive amount. And then the question, like I said, the question of whether it will be it is taxable income. So it will be taxable, but that, of course, like I said, the extent to which it is taxable depends on where you are on the tax, the tax brackets.
All right, sir. Well, thank you so much. I know, I can fairly say that another promise that government has made, the government has kept. And so I wanted to ask you finally, basically, what is the takeaway for what do you want people to see in terms of government doing for its people then?
No, well, absolutely. This is yet another example of our government not only delivering on our commitments, because I think there are ample examples of us delivering on our commitments. We campaigned on a manifesto. We were elected on the basis of a manifesto. And we have set about delivering our manifesto promises from the very beginning. So if you look at the People's Progressive Party manifesto, on the basis of which we were elected, you'll see many, many manifesto promises that we've already started delivering. The Gold Scholarship is one of them, restoration of the cash grant to students is one of them, increase in the old age pensions is one of them. So there are multiple things that we committed to in our manifesto that we've already started delivering on. Some of them we have already delivered, some of them we have reversal of the punitive taxes on electricity and water and so on. That was something that we committed to, and we did it as soon as we came into government. So there are a number of manifesto promises that we've already delivered on. There are some that we are delivering and are in the process of delivering. So in the first instance, I would want to say that this represents, of course, yet another demonstration of President Ali's government, of this People's Progressive Party government's commitment to deliver on our promises. But even beyond that, what it represents is that what it also represents, I should say, is a demonstration that we are committed to improving the circumstances and lives of all Guyanese. And bear in mind that many of the other initiatives that I alluded to also benefited public servants, teachers, members of the discipline services. When the COVID cash grant was being distributed, it went to every household, including public servants, teachers. It went to every Guyanese household, irrespective of whether you were working in the public sector or the private sector. When we were doing the cash grant to students, it went to every single Guyanese household. Whether you worked in the public sector or the private sector, every single household that had a child of school age benefited from that. Indeed, we also even extended it to private schools, which is a novelty, which was new this year. That there again, public servants, teachers, doctors, nurses, members of the discipline services benefited there too. And so this, of course, is targeted specifically at government employees, but it represents yet another demonstration or yet another example of our government's commitment to improving the lives of each and every single Guyanese person, each and every single Guyanese family.
And let's not forget the emergency responses that government has had, the emergencies that government has had to deal with in terms of the flooding and so on. I know that program in terms of cash grant to farmers has been very wide.
You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. In fact, I did not mention that one because it was, in response to the disaster of the flood.
Being mentioned.
But you are absolutely correct. I agree with you. It more than merits attention and merits mention. You're absolutely correct, and I'm glad that you highlighted it and pointed out that I did not mention it. And I thank you for that. That was a program that saw us rolling out more than almost $8 billion of cash transfers to persons who were affected by the floods. And it went to households, it went to farmers who had lost their crops, who had lost their livestock and so on. That was, a tremendous disaster response and relief program. Like I said, almost $8 billion worth of relief delivered to households and to persons in the productive sector, particularly in agriculture.
All right, if you're now joining us, we've been speaking to Dr. Ashni Singh. He's the Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance. And of course, Dr. Singh, you made a huge announcement today. The PPPC government, the President, keeping his promise of increases to public servants. And of course, that was 7%. And it was for teachers, members of the discipline services, constitutional office holders, as well as government pensioners. And so I want to thank you for speaking with us this afternoon. I know you've been very busy. Before you go, though, I wanted to give you just another opportunity to maybe say your last words to the citizens before we go.
Sure. So thank you very much, Felicia, once again for inviting me to be on the program. Like I said at the beginning, it's always a great pleasure to be here. It was my privilege today to be able to deliver the announcement that I did on behalf of His Excellency the President and the Cabinet. Like I said in the wrap-up, this is just really just another installment of this People's Progressive Party civic government continuing to work to improve the lives of all Guyanese persons. I might add that we're also, of course, very busy working on Budget 2022, and Budget 2022 will continue to roll out and advance our government's development agenda for Guyana as we navigate towards the prosperity that we see ahead for our country.
All right, Dr. Singh, thank you so much. Thank you as well for staying with us in the last. However long was our conversation. So thank you for watching.
Thank you very much, Felicia. Thank you, and thank you very much for viewers for inviting us into your living rooms. Thank you very much.